The hardest thing I had to learn, fiction language. I'm Karin with Right Now Editing, where we turn good manuscripts into great books.
And I'm Peg Thomas, multi-award winning author and editor, and we are two editors for 5 minutes.
And today we are starting a new series, if you will. Peg and I have been talking about some different topics that we might discuss here. And one of the things that kind of piqued our interest is, what was the hardest thing for you to learn to write as you were learning how to write fiction?
And no
And
surprise, we don't have the same things.
Not at all. And so to create a top 10 list, we actually each came up with five. So today we are going to start with one of Peg's top five one of her top five hardest things to learn about writing fiction, which was the fiction language. So let's get started. Peg,
All right.
what do you mean by the fiction language?
What I mean by fiction language is when you start actually writing fiction, you learn real quick that it is not the English you used in high school. We break rules, we bend rules, we twist things to tell a story. And the important part of that is we want to immerse the reader in the story. Whereas in English class, they wanted us to write these long purple prose, meandering sentences littered with adverbs and adjectives. That is not what we do in fiction writing, not at all. We want direct sentences. We do use adverbs and adjectives. The one, people who say, well, you don't use those in fiction are wrong. You do use them, but you use them judiciously. You use them seldom, and you use them for a particular reason. If you're just throwing in a lot of adjectives and adverbs, that's what we call lazy writing. So you want to be able to tell the story by showing instead of telling. Everybody's heard of that, I know. And you do that really by the way that you use the language that we have. One of the things you want to avoid, especially in dialogue, is realistic dialogue. Because realistically in dialogue, we do a lot of this. Nobody wants to read that. It's realistic. It's absolutely how we speak, but we don't write that way. Even if you have a character that tends to want to do that, if that's a character trait, you want to use it still sparingly. You don't want to beat the reader over the head with it. So that's one way that we twist it, is we make dialogue actually unnatural so that it sounds natural, which it seems.
And that is one of the weird. Hardest things that I, when working with authors, is explaining that your dialogue has to be natural, but it has to be unnatural. And that's why writing is hard, because it is a very thin line between having your character sound like your character without sounding like a real person. So if that's confusing to you, yes, it is a confusing concept to understand.
But once you master it, once you understand it, your writing will shine. That helps it a lot. Another thing we do is we use short, choppy sentences when we want to speed up the pace of a story. We use longer, slower sentences when we want to slow down and give the reader a break. We use fragmented sentences to emphasize points or to highlight certain parts of our story. And again, they're used judiciously, and they are breaking the English rules, but they're not breaking the fiction English rules, the fiction language.
I'm going to cut in here on this. This is one of the reasons why I tell people hiring former English teachers to edit your novels is a terrible idea. Unless they have some type of fiction writing or editing experience, they will edit your manuscript as if it's a personal essay. And the standards that you use in high school and in college for that type of writing are completely different. So it's tempting because, it's somebody that I know, or she doesn't charge a lot of money. Unless they have specifically worked in book publishing, avoid it.
Right. One other thing that we don't use in fiction is, or you rarely ever see it, is a colon or a semicolon. The idea in the fiction
language. And I love semicolons.
I know, but we don't use them there because if you think about it, we use them in nonfiction all the time. It's to set something apart. It's to make a point. It's whatever. It gives the reader pause. The last thing you want to do in fiction is stop your reader's eyes. You want to immerse them in the story. You want to keep them in the story. You don't want to pull them out with punctuation that they really don't need. So what do we use instead? The humble little comma, or we break it into two sentences. so that we're not. Readers will read right over a period, they'll read right over a comma, but you throw a semicolon or a colon in there and they're like, whoa, what's that doing there? So
And
learning
that's
those kind of things took time.
and that's the same thing even with you were mentioning like the adjectives and adverbs.
Mhm.
Anything that makes the reader pause and say, "Oh, this is beautiful writing," or "Oh, why am I pausing here?" Then they're not in the story, then they're reading your writing, and you don't want them reading your writing, you want them to disappear into the book. Okay,
Absolutely.
we've gone over, we're gonna go over, but Peg, how did you beat this? How did you learn to write fiction language?
Most important thing for me was working with editors, working with people who knew what they were doing. I also took editing classes, and you can take some editing classes online at pretty reasonable prices. Just make sure that they are fiction editing classes.
Yes.
That's what you're looking for. It's nonfiction is a very different thing. And my favorite book is Self Editing for Fiction Writers by King and Brown. Every couple of years or so, I just read back through it again because you can always use a refresher. It's a good one.
And so those are some of our suggestions for learning that fiction language. And next week, we're going to talk about one of the things that I have struggled with. Until then, I'm Karen Beery with Right Now Editing.
And I'm Peg Thomas. We'll see you next time.